Well, good morning. That's a picture of the headquarters of Electronic Frontier Foundation on Eddy Street. I don't know if they're still there. That's where they were in 2018 when I visited them in person. And I just wanted to talk about a meeting online last night, a Zoom meeting that we had with Electronic Frontier Foundation after they had their annual Guardian gathering online. It was at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, 5 in the Pacific, and those were some of the people that were there. And I also want to talk about um, a web, you know, a WordPress entry that I have that I'm the going to give the URL for in the notes. The main issue is the recent tendency of many states to pass laws banning requiring adult verification at sign-on for supposedly adult websites, and a couple of concerns about that. I've actually written up here the condition as it is in several states. Virginia, whose law went into effect on July of 2023. Utah and Louisiana, Texas, Florida, Kansas, and Georgia are more recent. And there are questions, of course, about the safety of any kind of adult verification of a website or social media site for that matter. And a lot of these also apply to social media, obviously, and algorithms. But even websites that don't depend on algorithms could be affected. And Louisiana supposedly has a digital wallet or something that is supposedly a little safer than some of the other methods that have been proposed. I don't know much about that. Pornhub was one of the most vocal sites in objecting to that, and pulled out of some states, including Virginia, saying that ordinary adult ID verification was totally unworkable, and it wants everything to be done by device. And at first, Pornhub still worked if you went in not on your cable provider, but if you went in just on your Verizon, you know, if you just went on and used your phone, um, and went on with the normal phone access, but then they closed that. And and they also say that they won't allow access in Virginia at all because they don't think they can do it safely. And there's another site, Gay Hot Movies, though, that only just required me to give my birth date, which I don't like doing, by the way, but required me to, and then it let me log on. So I'm not sure how strictly these various sites are following them. Um, but the the just one of the things I mentioned in the meeting, I was the first person in the Q&A in that meeting after the three presentations. The presentations, by the way, were about other topics. They were about AI, and then about incarcerated individuals, and then about the NSA and some service Section 202 and the NSA. So, and then I asked my question about um, all of these state laws and requiring adult verification of websites. And we talked about it for 15 or 20 minutes. I talked a little bit. I don't think that EFF makes a copy of video, a YouTube copy of that Zoom call for me to put on my playlist. If they did, I'll put it up, but I don't think they normally do that. Um, the whole question of what you can teach. First of all, it does seem that these state laws are aiming at adult sites because most of them all of them I've seen so far have provisions they apply to sites one third or one fourth, or in the case of Georgia, a substantial portion of which is harmful to minors material. And then they usually define harmful to minors in the way it was defined in COPA. It's mostly in terms of explicit visual stuff and very explicit discussions, possibly. But there's a question, for example, in the Kansas law, the way homosexuality is mentioned in the Kansas law, and it's I mentioned even apart from transgenderism. Sometimes, as you may know, with Project 2025, um, um, the right and the concern about what happens if the GOP is in charge next year. It wouldn't even have to be Trump. It's what happens with online with a topic like age verification and uh, whether there's conflation between homosexuality and transgenderism is which of course many of us in the gay community want completely separate, but whether they're conflated is in the eyes of a lot of people is it's not as easy to separate them as we would like. I've gotten into that to other sites. What you teach in schools, well, obviously you have to teach the law, and obviously in high school you're going to teach civics, you're going to teach about the Supreme Court, you're going to teach about Lawrence versus Texas in 2003, and you're teaching about Obergefell in 2015. So you're going to have to teach the gay rights as we normally have understood it, apart from this interpretation of gender identity. It's the teaching of gender identity, which is mandated by law, which is controversial. And I won't get into it this morning exactly why it's so controversial. It's the subjectivity of it, basically. Um, but also the idea that in 2022 in the spring, remember the Politico story, and then when Roe versus Wade was overturned, that uh, Alito says you couldn't depend on substantive due process as much as we have, um, and that could be a threat to laws regarding to decisions like Obergefell or even Lawrence versus Texas down the road. And they're teaching that's conceivable that it could. Um, there's a whole idea that uh, there's been a tendency for activists to use equal protection and try to define a group as an oppressed group and put more people in the oppressed group and get people, even like me, to be willing to see themselves as members of one of these groups rather than to act individually. Um, and I like substantive due process. I think substantive due process is a much better concept for conservatives to use to defend individual rights, especially free speech, but even in any private behaviors in your own life. Substantive due process is a much better concept than equal protection and trying to get people to want to be parts of these groups. Um, and Also, I just mentioned in my notes here, yeah, in teaching in high school, you'd also teach the science. You'd have to teach why binary sexes and the fact there are two basic sexes in nature, why that's a foundation of biology and advanced terrestrial life on Earth, what that means in science, not what it means politically, apart from the politics, why that matters in science and why that means that we're here as a dominant species. I mean, you have to teach that on in science in schools. So what you want to keep out of schools or keep away from kids is not very simple. It's not as simple as they like. But anyway, those are the main things I talked about, particularly why I pressed the idea, why aren't they forcing the 2007 COPA Child Online Protection Act decision more in forcing these down, forcing states to be confronted with the COPA law, which would seem to me the COPA decision would make some of these state laws unconstitutional. Some of them have been challenged in court recently. SCOTUS let the Texas law stand on May 1st after I think a circuit court had turned it down. Some of these other states will certainly be challenged, but it can be a problem, and I'll talk about that more on a personal level soon. And so that's what I have this morning, and I do thank you a lot for listening.